Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Optimum Potential Podcast. My name is Dr. Matthew Barr, I'm a physical therapist.
And my name is Chris Shaw, I'm a registered dietitian and personal trainer. We are going to be sifting through all the BS out there and bringing you real health and fitness information.
Regardless of your training experience and how much you know about nutrition, our goal is to help you reach your optimum potential.
So in today's episode, the first thing we are going to be covering is realistic goal setting and how you can set yourself up for success. So Matt, how do you help people reach their goals when they come to see you?
I think first off, you need to break things down and make it simpler. You know, everyone's trying to look at the long-term goals and they're not worried about those little short-term small victories along the way. So I think teaching people that and how they can go about reaching those small victories is going to help them stay on their track of continuing to build and reach that ultimate goal at the end there. But if you don't have those small victories along the way, I think that's when people tend to kind of get lost a little bit and veer away from the process.
Yeah, it could definitely be frustrating if you're looking at the end goal and you're not reaching it as quickly as you would like, right? Like people, whenever I see them, when they come to me the first time, like usually they want to, whether it's lose weight, improve blood markers because they went to the doctor and something came back, like pre-diabetes or hypertension or something. We live in a world where we want instant gratification, but when it comes to your health, especially if you're trying to reach something in like some long-term health goal, it's going to take time. So what is something that you do, because I'm interested from a physical therapy standpoint, like what is something you do to help people like see those incremental changes along the way?
A lot of it is just making sure that they see what is an improvement first off. You know, is it a improvement in mobility? You know, a lot of times, let's say first shoulder injury, somebody might have pain once they get right around here. So now, you know, if they can get to here and be a little bit further before they feel that pain, you know, they're still feeling pain, but it's an improvement. So ultimately, obviously, complete pain relief is the goal. But you need to show them that, all right, you're making victories along the way. So whether that's improved mobility, decreased pain, improvement in strength, are they doing more throughout the day than they were doing prior? You know, if it's a leg injury, let's say, are you able to walk further? All those little things that tend to add up.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. One of the things I love to do is look at like a 3 or 6 month goal, right? Like we set a timeline for what that is. And then if you could figure out, all right, where do you want to be in a month, in 2 months, in 3 months, and break that down into a little bit smaller of a chunk and then look at it like from a week to week standpoint. I just think that's so much better than saying like, I need to lose 15 pounds. And if in a week you're not down even a pound or two yet, it seems like you're failing, right? Like something I love to do. Are you familiar with like a habit tracker?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's something I do. Like I always love to set like 2 or 3 goals for people, right? Because if you do any more than that, sometimes it just becomes overwhelming and there's just too much to look at within that. So if you have like 2 or 3 goals, you write like Monday through Sunday out on the top. And then if you worked on that habit that day, it's a circle, right? If you didn't, it's an X. This way, at the end of the week, if you look back, you can see where you're consistent, where maybe you're not as consistent, and you could see progress that way. And you can start to see like some linear progress where even if those other objective measurables that you're looking for, like you're saying, they're not totally over their shoulder, like over their head yet, but they see even a degree of change, you know at least you're moving in that right direction. And I think that's huge for people.
So one thing I'll usually sometimes work with patients, I'll tell them that, you know, everybody has time throughout the day to watch their favorite TV show. So, you know, if they're finding that they can't find the time to work in their home exercise program, you know, maybe in between those commercials, that's when they mix in their mobility work or there are few exercises that I give them on a weekly basis, and those small little increments kind of add up over the long haul, and that's when you start to see those results.
Yeah, no. I think when people are trying to achieve goals, right, they set a goal that sometimes might not really be realistic. It might be realistic in the long term, but the time frame they're giving themselves might not be realistic, right? So they're very motivated. You know, we're in February now, so this is after like that New Year's resolution. Maybe things started to fall off for some people. This is a really common time where like a majority of people are kind of like away from what that goal was initially. And when you're motivated, when there's some like impetus to move towards something, it's really easy to start sprinting. So they set a huge goal. Maybe they say like, hey, I'm going to work, like they haven't been exercising. And they say, I'm going to work out 7 days a week. Like, is that realistic for anybody? Probably not, at least for most people, right? So they set probably too big of a goal for themselves in the beginning. And maybe they hit it the first week, but then they get busy. Their job gets a little crazy. Their child, like something comes up with that. Things get in the way. Life gets in the way. And then all of a sudden they miss 2 days the next week. The next week after that, they missed 3 workouts, right? And all of a sudden, it feels like they're failing. But if you look at it, they went from not exercising at all to exercising 3 to 4 times a week. Like, that's huge improvement. But because they set that initial goal of 7, it feels like they're failing. So if you can start to turn that around, it's like, what are these foundational habits that I can work on each and every week and start to track them in a different way than we're used to tracking them? You can start to see progress in a whole different light, which is really important for people when motivation starts to wane a little bit, when their progress isn't as quick. If they could start to, like you were saying, like see those wins on paper in a slightly different way, it's huge for staying consistent.
Yeah, it prevents you from getting discouraged.
Yeah,
I'll have people that come in for like a chronic issue, and they expect things to get resolved within a week or 2. You figure if it took months, maybe years to build up and get to that point, it's going to take longer than 2-3 weeks to improve and get back to being pain-free or whatever their goal might be. So I think it all stems back to just being realistic, setting those small improvements that, they can sustain over the long haul.
So how do you handle someone, because we're talking about realistic, right? So if somebody's motivated, I never want to discourage someone from like trying to reach toward a really big goal, right? But like, what are some things you do if somebody comes to you with like a huge strength improvement goal or something that like from your eyes, like, all right, this probably isn't realistic right now. How do you help them see like this might be a future goal, but let's look at something a little more realistic now without turning it into something that doesn't feel as big?
Yeah, I have a few marathon runners I work with. Well, for example, where if your goal is to run a marathon, 26 miles, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
So if you're only running 2 or 3 miles tops, and you're already thinking about this 26-mile goal, there's got to be smaller steps along the way to get you there. Not only so it's safely but efficiently.
Right.
So I think it's setting those small goals in between. Where, all right, maybe the first goal is 5 miles, and we've built in goals in between that, just so that they can gradually get there. We can work on things along the way, see how they feel, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and just build on that. So I think it's not looking at the long term and only the long term goal. You need to have something quantitative in the middle there to work towards and reach, so that you are making that progress. And once you see, like, all right, I hit 5 miles. All right, now let's go 10. Once you hit 10, all right, 15, and you just gradually get to that point where you're at that goal of 26 miles. So it's definitely hitting those small increments along the way.
Yeah, I think that's huge from like an injury prevention standpoint too, right? Like that's definitely one of the biggest injuries that I've seen in training. Like when I'm working with somebody, or if I just like see people in the gym, it's getting out of the gate too quick. They go from not running to 10 miles a day, and all of a sudden you have those overuse injuries that come up pretty quickly.
Yeah, before you know it, the hip flexor is hurting, or they have back pain now because their walking mechanics or the running mechanics are getting thrown off. So it all comes into play, and if you gradually work towards that goal, you can kind of nip those symptoms in the bud along the way before they have the time to progress into something more. So it's just setting the right tempo and going from there.
Yeah, no, that's huge. Like I know from a nutrition standpoint, when people are trying to follow like a specific diet, right? Like if they're going from really not paying attention to what they're eating at all to then following something, there isn't necessarily anything wrong with like a keto diet or a vegan diet, like any of those specific things, they do work for people. But anytime you take no awareness to like a big drastic change, it's just hard to stick to that consistently, right? And so if you can slow down and say like, all right, instead of changing your entire diet today, if you can find a way to cook one meal at home today, maybe work on hydration, work on like daily step goals if you're not really exercising yet, like just have some of these smaller foundational pieces that even if you're extremely busy, even if life gets in the way, you can hit that because you can make something at home, or while you're out, maybe you can make a decision that's more in line with what you would cook at home. Like one meal a day is all you need to start with, right? Like just work on one thing, work on moving more, work on hydration. If you can do those consistently and create that foundation, like you were saying with 5 miles, 10 miles, like once you have that foundation, you can start building upon that and it just becomes something that's second nature for you without necessarily thinking too much about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now to kind of touch on like that part of like going out, let's say, and going to restaurants and all that.
Yeah.
How do you tell people, how do they go about that where it's, they're seeing all these things on the menu, not necessarily the healthiest options. How can they make realistic and sustainable goals from there?
That's really important because especially today, like the way we live, there's a lot of like on-the-go eating, right? So mindful eating, intuitive eating, whatever label you want to put on it, right? Like it's definitely a topic that I think gets taken out of context too often. Because you can be somebody who wants to work on like performance goals. You can be somebody who maybe wants to like count calories, do macro counting, whatever it is. I think there's always a place for that like mindful eating component of it, because essentially all we're doing is taking our brain, connecting it right back to the body, right? Understanding what we're trying to put in our body, understanding what we're feeling in that moment. So one thing that I always like to recommend for anybody who's eating out is if you can, before making that food decision when you're out, like just take a second, check in with yourself, figure out how hungry are you? Do you have any specific cravings? Like if you're looking at the menu, is anything standing out to you that you really, really want? If you really want to enjoy a cheeseburger or something, right? Like that's fine. Like that does fit in a sustainable program. Like that's not the end of the world if you eat something like that, right? Like that's part of everything else. But at the same time, if you're looking at this and you're not really craving anything specifically, and you see something that's more in line with what you have been eating at home, and that is something that you're in the mood for at that time too, there's nothing wrong with eating a salad with grilled chicken or something while you're out either. So there's a way where if you just start to slow down a little bit, check in with yourself and understand why you're making certain food decisions and like what you're really craving in that moment, you can find a way to create some sustainability without creating restriction around that either.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of times I find, at least when I talk to patients about nutrition, I usually send them your way, but they're often, they'll have one bad day, and I feel like that leads them to have another bad day and another one, and before they know it, they're completely, off the track, and they don't know how to get back to it. So Absolutely. I think that's a really important aspect to bring up to people.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like that's why that mindful eating component to me is just so important to include in any program, because if you go out and you make that conscious decision to eat a cheeseburger, like you can enjoy it, you're with family, you're with friends, like you're actually enjoying the meal you're having, and you're also understanding that like you made that food decision in that moment and you didn't ruin any progress. Like one meal out is not going to remove the weeks prior to that you worked on and improved on up to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of take that a step further, when you come to like programming for your clients, is there a generalized approach that you go with, or does it need to be tailored to the individual? Yeah,
so it definitely has to be tailored to the individual. Now, with that, there are some overarching things that we're going to work on with basically anybody, right? So that mindful eating component, like I was saying, is just like really creating awareness around what you're doing. That is going to be in every program for the most part, unless somebody's like really averse to that, but for the most part, that's always going to be included. Some other things are just really starting to understand like the basic foundation of nutrition and like what nutritious meals, balanced meals look like. And then once we have that initial structure and we have a little bit of a structure in place as far as like their daily life goes, and we can figure out like how to start implementing these changes within that, that's where we'll start to fine tune things and get really specific. And now from like your standpoint with physical therapy, I know you see people with all different injuries, but say shoulder injuries like you were talking about before, like is there a specific approach that you're taking with everybody?
Yeah, it's very similar with your clients. Where I think, at least once I'll have somebody reach out and they'll be like, all right, I have a shoulder impingement. What's the best exercise to fix it?
All the time, yeah.
So everybody's looking for that magic pill. They're looking for that one exercise that's going to fix the problem. And it's really not the case. Everybody's so different. Body structure wise, what's their activity level? What are they looking to get back to? Are they more athletic? Are they more sedentary? What do they do for a living? So all these variables are going to play a role in determining what we're going to do during their rehab program. On top of, is it due to a stability issue versus a mobility issue? So if you're looking for that cookie cutter program, it's not necessarily, maybe sometimes it will fix somebody's issues, but if it doesn't, I think that's when people get kind of turned off to physical therapy and they think the process didn't work and they just give up. Where if they were to get that individualized program, tailored to what their needs were, that's when you start to see the success. So it's definitely, there's no cookie cutter program, approach that you can go about for everybody.
Yeah, no, I think what you said is huge too, right? Like everybody's coming at it from a different knowledge base and standpoint, right? Like the program I'm sure that you're writing or that I would write for somebody who's been training for 15 years is different than somebody who's coming into the gym for the very first time.
Exactly.
So there's so much training history, there's nutrition history, there's medical history. And like you said too, I think one of the biggest components, honestly, is the lifestyle, right? Like somebody who's single, like a young single person versus somebody who's married with 2 jobs, like that program is going to look different because their life is just so different. The time constraint is different. Like how do you find, like from your standpoint, like how do you help somebody who has kids, who has 2 jobs, who wants to exercise, but really feels like they only have like 10 minutes to themselves every day? Like, how do you help them continue to make progress when life is so chaotic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like living through that myself right now.
Right.
I mean, it's just now that I have my son, you know, working out 4 or 5 days a week, it's not an option. You know, there's just too much else going on. So, but you don't want to just completely stop and do nothing. So I think you really need to look at your schedule. You talk with your spouse or whatever the issue it might be, and make sure that you're on the same page when it comes to scheduling. And you got to work as a team. But you got to find those minutes or those hours throughout the day where you can get that workout in. So for some people, it works best in the morning. Sometimes it might be best at night. But, you know, I think you got to find, everybody's got an hour throughout the week somewhere to do something, whether that's the weekend, the weekdays. You really got to find those times and capitalize on it, because at the end of the day, you know, nobody's going to care about your health more than yourself. So you need to be proactive and make the attempt to better yourself.
Yeah, no, that's great. Like, I think one of the biggest things that I do for people who are that busy is understand, like, formal workouts are really important, especially if you have specific strength goals, or like if you're working with somebody who does have an injury or something. Like, we do need structure within that. But I think one of the things that gets underestimated the most is the power of just like moving throughout the day. Like, the best thing you can do for your health is just find time throughout the day to just move your body. It doesn't have to be an hour and a half in the gym every single day. It can be so simple, like park further if you're going to the store. Park on the other side of the parking garage, walk a little bit further. If you're working from your desk all day, find time, whether it's once an hour, once every 2 hours. So just get up, walk around your house, walk around your office building, walk up the stairs instead of the elevator. Like, these little incremental things that people just don't really think about, over the long term, change everything for somebody's health.
Yeah, and how many times do you see people on their phone for like 10, 15 minutes at their desk where, you know, maybe they go for a 15-minute walk, you know, and they feel better physically, you feel better emotionally, mentally, you 100%. Get away from work for a little bit. So there's so many more benefits to just doing that, but it's, you know, finding that time and being proactive about it.
I think there's an underestimation as far as stress goes too when it comes to health, right? Like you were just talking about, like if you're at your desk at work and you're scrolling through Instagram for 10 minutes, like that is a stress inducer for some people, or like, you know, just being on social media or trying to distract yourself with things that aren't necessarily like improving you. But if you could just step away from your desk and forget about work, forget about everything else, and just go for a walk for a couple of minutes, like just finding that stillness and that time to just like step away is such a big stress reducer too. And stress affects sleep. Sleep affects everything in your life. So like everything is interconnected. So doing little things like that just makes such a big difference overall.
Yeah, I mean, they always say, it's 70% diet, 30% gym. Like it's always the outside variables that I find affect the gym once you're there. So if you can, you know, look at the other things and get those right, you know, I think that carries over into the physical aspect as well.
I agree. Yeah, it's like those little distractions that come into play. So you're familiar with James Clear? All right, so like he talks about forming habits. There's like this 4-step process. So there's cue, craving, response, and then reward, right? So every habit, there's something that like triggers it, and then we have a craving because something triggered that initial thought. Then there's a response, which is like the action behind it, and then there has to be a reward tied to it. So if you're looking at it through the lens of like starting to create some foundational habits for new fitness, nutrition, whatever it is, first we need to be aware of like what that cue is, like what is the initial like impetus to go do something. And then so like say you're walking past a bakery and you smell a cookie, right? Like the cue is the smell. The craving is like, I want a cookie because I had that cue, like that response. The response is eating that actual cookie. And the reward is you satisfy that craving, that cue, the craving from the initial cue, right? So when we're looking at it from like a fitness or a nutrition standpoint, like I love to try to figure out like what those cues are. So like you're saying, like when does somebody have time to go to the gym? Like if they're trying to go to the gym in the morning, right? Like if that alarm goes off, like most people's response when the alarm goes off is to try to stay in bed. But if we can start to shift that where like that alarm is the cue to like, all right, I want to go exercise. we need to tie a reward to that. The reward is getting healthier, having more energy. So if you can start to look at it and break it down into like easier components where it's like the cue is the alarm. All right, like I get up, my shoes are next to my bed, I'll put them on and I go start working out. Then you start getting really happy and like rewarding yourself, like being proud of yourself for exercising in the morning. That's where we could start to create these like stronger habits that become second nature for somebody.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I think also, to take a step further, I mean, you got to do what you enjoy too.
100%.
You know, it's not 100%. Everybody loves going to the gym and working out, and that's okay. But you need to find what works best for you. Is it Orange Theory? Is it yoga? Is it Pilates? Is it running? You know, I think if you find what you enjoy, that's going to make it more sustainable in the long haul too, because you're actually going to enjoy doing it. It's not going to feel like a chore. And once it becomes a chore, that's when people tend to drop off and they don't continue to make that progress.
1000%. Like that's part of that is like, it needs to be easy and it needs to be enjoyable. Because no matter how much of a reward you see, like at the end of the light for whatever your goal is, if you hate running and you're making yourself go out and run every single morning, there's going to be a point where you're like, I'm not doing this, right? Like it's because it's not fun, it's not enjoyable. That's one thing I always love to do with people when they first come to see me, especially if there's no training background, but even if there is like some sort of training background, they have like a diet history, they've tried different things before. I love the first, whether it's the first week or the first month is variable, but I love to have like a self-exploration phase, right? Like if somebody's like, hey, I want to improve my cardiovascular fitness, it's like, I don't necessarily want to set somebody up with like a running program at first. Like I would love for them to do a day of running, a day of rowing, a day of swimming, a day of yoga, a day of Orange Theory fitness, whatever it is. Like just start trying different things. Because the thing that you want to go back to is the thing you enjoy, and it's the thing that you are actually going to sustain long term. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah. You know, and this is sometimes having something to keep you accountable too, it works. Just to play the devil's advocate, and let's say somebody, you know, a marathon runner that they love running, but they don't necessarily like working out, but you know, working out helps to keep them, you know, running healthy. You know, how do you work that in where it's like, all right, you know, maybe you need somebody to kind of push you a little bit where like, all right, if I don't like going to the gym, maybe I get that personal trainer for a day or two during the week. So it's something that keeps me accountable. It maybe makes the process a little bit more enjoyable too, because you have somebody there to help you through the way. And maybe that's something that you build on and you learn to love. So it's just another option of, you know, going a different route to get to your goal.
Yeah, I think there's like two components to that, where there's a coach and there's community, right? So the coach, from a coaching standpoint, the coach is able to see like the entire mountain, right? So say like you're just starting and you're climbing and you're climbing and you're climbing. When you're in that yourself, a lot of the time it's really hard to see how far you've gone because you can't see the bottom, you can't see the top, right? But if you have a coach who's like looking at it from like 1,000 miles away, they can see the entire mountain. Yeah. They can see how much progress you've actually made. They can see how high up the mountain you really are and how close you are. And they can see potential pitfalls that are up there, so they can help you kind of like navigate and take different routes if needed, so you can continue to move forward. The other component to that is community. Because that's, you know, you were talking about Orange Theory Fitness. Like that's one of the reasons it's so successful and people love it so much, is because you can surround yourself with people who are doing things similar to you, who have similar passions. Even like you were saying, if you don't love running, but you're in a really good running group with great people, like you're going to be more inclined to continue to go to that because you're around people who are like motivating you and helping you along that way too. Yeah,
it's a powerful tool, and it definitely helps a lot of people along the way. So it's definitely something that a lot of people should look into if they find that they can't get that motivation to get started. You know, maybe that's the motivation they need.
Yeah, 1,000%. So what do you do with somebody if it feels like motivation has waned and it feels like they might not really be as into a goal that they had in the beginning any longer because life changed, life got a little crazy, stress, like whatever it is?
I think that's when you need to go over goals again. I mean, are the goals the same or have they changed?
Right.
So, you know, if it's not the goal anymore, then you got to probably adjust the program accordingly so that they get back on track and they get back to that motivated state. So it's, you know, definitely, I think I like to do like kind of check-ins, you know, every few visits, every few weeks, whatever it might be, based off, you know, what their long-term, you know, duration is. Just to see, are they still motivated, or how do they feel about the program, or maybe show them the numbers and be like, all right, this is where you started, this is where you're now. Like you've gained this much strength, or you've improved your mobility this much, or you're running this much further, and you know you did that. You know, so I think seeing those results, maybe that gets them back into the program and motivated again. So I think anybody, if you don't see results, you're not going to want to stick around for anything. So it's looking at the small things along the way and hopefully getting back on track.
I think that's huge too. From whether it's you're working with a coach or it's like a self-awareness standpoint, checking back in and reviewing why you're doing what you're doing is so important. Mm-hmm. But I also think it's important to remember, like, life changes. So if you had a goal in January and March, you don't really care about the same thing as much, but you're trying to like work towards something else. Like that isn't failure. If you didn't reach that initial goal, like it's okay to deviate from a specific plan a little bit or to change your perspective on something a little bit. Like that's part of being human, right? Yeah. So I think it's important to remember if your goals change or you kind of deviate, like that isn't failure. To me, that's actually progress because you're starting to like learn what the process is, learn what you enjoy. Maybe you wanted to run a marathon and in running, you were doing strength training to support that. And you realize like, actually, you know what? I want to start devoting more time to strength training because I actually like this more. I'm feeling a little bit stronger or vice versa. Like it's okay to deviate as long as you're continuing to move forward and so, improving your health and trying to just become a little bit better overall. Like it's okay to deviate. Like, I actually encourage it personally.
At the end of the day, it's just, you gotta feel good.
Yeah.
You gotta leave the gym feeling good or leave your, finish your run feeling good. If you're ever leaving the gym or you're leaving anything where you feel like crap, physically, emotionally, mentally, I think that's when it becomes draining. And it's just, I think we always got to check in with ourselves as well, along with our clients, just to make sure that everything's going smoothly along the way and they're reaching their goals.
Yeah, I love that. With that said, we'd love to hear from you guys. Let us know how you're feeling when you're leaving the gym, how you're doing with your nutrition plan.
Or if you're dealing with any nagging injuries, shoot us a message or a comment below. We'd love to help you guys out.